A homeless black boy saves a pregnant white woman and her toddler from a dangerous fall, but the racist millionaire's response is nothing like anyone expected. How will this heroic act impact the boy's life? A grand, luxurious mansion stands tall, its spiraling staircase glistening under the glow of an enormous crystal chandelier. Polished marble floors reflect the golden lights, the entire space exuding wealth and elegance. Waiters in crisp uniforms move about, setting tables, pouring champagne, and ensuring everything is flawless for the extravagant event taking place inside. Guests in shimmering gowns and tailored suits glide across the floor, laughing, toasting, and indulging in the lavish atmosphere. The air is thick with expensive perfume, the sound of clinking glasses and polite conversation filling the space like a perfectly orchestrated melody. Malik, a 10-year-old black boy, watches from the shadows, unnoticed. He doesn't belong here, not really. He lives on the streets, surviving off scraps, running errands in hopes that someone will toss him a few coins or a piece of bread. Tonight, he managed to sneak in by helping the catering crew take out the trash. It isn't much, but at least he'll get to eat. The scent of roasted meats and fresh pastries makes his empty stomach twist painfully, but he knows better than to reach for anything. He keeps his head down, pretending not to exist, just as he always does. As he carries a trash bag toward the back door, something catches his eye. A pregnant white woman, dressed in a shimmering gown, is making her way down the grand staircase. In her arms, she holds a small toddler, no more than 2 years old. They are both smiling, the child giggling as he rests against her shoulder. The sight is picture-perfect, something out of a magazine. The kind of moment Malik has only ever seen from a distance. Then it happens. She takes a step and suddenly she slips. Her heel twists against the smooth marble, her balance shifting dangerously. The toddler squeals, his tiny arms flailing as his mother's grip loosens. In an instant, Malik sees what no one else has noticed. The woman is falling, and if she hits the ground, both she and the child could be seriously hurt. His breath catches, his body tensing. The entire world seems to slow, every detail becoming sharper, clearer. The angle of her body, the panic in her wide eyes, the way the guests remain oblivious, their laughter continuing as if nothing is happening. Malik's heart pounds. He has no time to think. He has to act now. His feet move before his mind does, instinct overriding fear. The distance between them feels impossibly far, yet he pushes forward, weaving through the crowd, arms reaching out. The sound of her gasp echoes in his ears, followed by the sharp cry of the toddler as they both tumble forward. The moment stretches, the fall inevitable, the impact certain, unless Malik can reach them in time. Malik's heart pounds. He has no time to think. He has to act now. Have you ever witnessed danger before anyone else? Tell us your experience. Where are you watching from and what time is it? Malik's body reacts before his mind does. He runs. His heartbeat thunders in his ears, his legs moving without hesitation as he races toward the grand staircase. Every instinct screams at him to go faster. The world around him fades, the voices, the music, the clinking glasses, all distant noise. The woman loses her balance, her grip on the toddler tightening as her body tilts backward. Her gown billows around her, her free hand flailing as she desperately tries to catch herself. A look of sheer terror flashes across her face, but there's nothing she can do. Gravity is already pulling her down. In a heartbeat, Malik leaps up the stairs, arms outstretched. His small hands reach for her, his fingers barely brushing the fabric of her dress before he lunges forward with everything he has. The muscles in his legs burn as he pushes off the marble floor, a last-ditch effort to reach her before it's too late. He catches her mid-fall, his arms absorbing the impact, as she crashes into him. The toddler, still clutched tightly in her embrace, lets out a startled squeal, but Malik doesn't let go. His knees slam against the stairs, pain jolting through his body as he struggles to keep them both from rolling further down. His arms shake under the weight, but he holds on, bracing them as best as he can. The world around them finally takes notice. A collective gasp ripples through the crowd, heads turning toward the staircase. Glasses freeze midair, conversations halt, and for a split second, time seems to stand still. The music cuts off, leaving only the ragged sound of Malik's breath and the woman's rapid, shallow gasps. Gasping, she clutches her belly, shaken but unharmed. Her eyes widen in disbelief as she stares at Malik, realization washing over her. She's safe. The baby is safe. And it's because of him. Tears well in her eyes, a mix of shock and relief flooding through her. The toddler, wide-eyed, looks around in confusion. Then, as if unaware of how close they came to disaster, he lets out a small giggle, his chubby hands patting his mother's shoulder. The innocence of his laughter breaks the tension, a stark contrast to the chaos that almost was. The murmurs start first, soft, hushed whispers spreading through the room. Then someone claps. Another follows. Soon, the entire room erupts in applause. The rich, powerful guests who barely acknowledged Malik moments ago now look at him in awe. But Malik barely hears them. His arms still tremble from the strain, his breath still uneven. He looks at the woman, unsure of what to say, unsure of what comes next. Did he just change his life? Or did he make things worse for himself? The toddler, wide-eyed, giggles, completely unaware of how close they came to disaster. Would you risk yourself to save a stranger? Let's talk about it. Footsteps thunder down the hall, heavy and deliberate. The sharp click of polished shoes against marble echoes through the now silent room. A tall, wealthy-looking man appears in the doorway, his presence commanding immediate attention. His suit is pristine, tailored to perfection, his expression hard and unreadable. The room, once alive with murmurs and whispers, stills as all eyes turn toward him. Even the air seems to shift, thickening with tension. Mr. Langston, the woman's husband, a powerful businessman, freezes at the sight before him. His wife, still trembling, sits on the staircase clutching their child. The scene is surreal, her glittering gown pooling around her, her breath coming in short gasps, the toddler resting against her, oblivious to the chaos that nearly unfolded. Her fingers press into the fabric of her dress as she steadies herself, the weight of what just happened settling into her bones. His coal blue eyes lock onto Malik, taking in his dirty clothes, tattered sneakers, and scraped arms. His jaw tightens, his face twisting in disapproval, as his gaze sweeps over the boy who doesn't belong in a place like this. His hands curl into fists at his sides, his posture rigid, as though the very presence of someone like Malik standing in his home is an offense in itself. He exhales sharply, his lip curling in distaste. "Who let this street rat in my house?" he barks. His voice slices through the room like a blade, laced with anger and authority. The words hit like a slap, sending another wave of unease rippling through the guests. The people who had moments ago been clapping now exchange uneasy glances, shifting on their feet, unsure whether to step in or stay silent. No one dares to answer. No one wants to meet Mr. Langston's icy stare. Malik shrinks back. He's used to this kind of reaction. He's spent his life being looked at like this, being dismissed before anyone even knows his name. His stomach knots, his instincts telling him to run, to disappear before things get worse. But his legs refuse to move. The weight of the moment presses down on him, trapping him in place. He's never felt smaller, never felt so aware of the gap between himself and people like the man before him. The woman, still shaken, speaks up, her voice unsteady but firm. "He saved us. I could have lost the baby. He caught us just in time." Her hand presses against her stomach protectively, her eyes pleading as she looks at her husband. She is breathless, her body still recovering from the near tragedy. Her words hang in the air, waiting to be met with some kind of understanding. But Mr. Langston doesn't look grateful. He looks disgusted. His lips curl as if even the thought of Malik being near his family is offensive. His gaze flickers to the guests, then back to his wife, as if he's more concerned about appearances than the fact that she and their child were just saved from disaster. He inhales deeply, his shoulders rising and falling as he wrestles with something unseen. The room grows tense. How will he react next? Footsteps thunder down the hall, heavy and deliberate. The sharp click of polished shoes against marble echoes through the now silent room. A tall, wealthy-looking man appears in the doorway, his presence commanding immediate attention. His suit is pristine, tailored to perfection, his expression hard and unreadable. The room, once alive with murmurs and whispers, stills as all eyes turn toward him. Even the air seems to shift, thickening with tension. Mr. Langston, the woman's husband, a powerful businessman, freezes at the sight before him. His wife, still trembling, sits on the staircase clutching their child. The scene is surreal, her glittering gown pooling around her, her breath coming in short gasps, the toddler resting against her, oblivious to the chaos that nearly unfolded. Her fingers press into the fabric of her dress as she steadies herself, the weight of what just happened settling into her bones. His cold blue eyes lock onto Malik, taking in his dirty clothes, tattered sneakers, and scraped arms. His jaw tightens, his face twisting in disapproval as his gaze sweeps over the boy who doesn't belong in a place like this. His hands curl into fists at his sides, his posture rigid, as though the very presence of someone like Malik standing in his home is an offense in itself. He exhales sharply, his lip curling in distaste. "Who let this street rat in my house?" he barks. His voice slices through the room like a blade, laced with anger and authority. The words hit like a slap, sending another wave of unease rippling through the guests. The people, who had moments ago been clapping now, exchange uneasy glances, shifting on their feet, unsure whether to step in or stay silent. No one dares to answer. No one wants to meet Mr. Langston's icy stare. Mr. Langston turns to the house staff. "Get this boy out of my house now!" Malik's stomach drops. After everything, he's still being thrown away. The moment that had once been filled with applause now feels suffocating, as though the walls are closing in on him. The same hands that had saved a life now clench at his sides, trembling with frustration and hurt. The woman gasps, looking at her husband in disbelief. "Are you serious? He just saved me." Her voice wavers, torn between shock and anger, her hand still cradling her stomach. The memory of nearly falling down the staircase is fresh in her mind, yet here her husband stands, more concerned with appearances than the fact that their child and their unborn one could have been lost in an instant. Mr. Langston waves her off. "I don't want my son near people like him." His voice is cold, final, as if Malik is nothing more than a problem that needs to be removed. The words strike harder than the insult before, twisting something deep inside Malik's chest. He knew not to expect kindness, but this. Malik clenches his fists, his throat tight. He wants to say something, to defend himself, but what would be the point? His entire life, people like Mr. Langston have decided what he is before he ever had a chance to prove them wrong. He takes a step back, turning toward the door, his shoulders stiff with the weight of humiliation. He turns to leave, but just before he steps out, a voice speaks up from the doorway. "Sir, you might want to reconsider. What do you think happens next? Drop your predictions." A butler steps forward, his hands trembling. He hesitates before speaking, his voice low but firm. "Sir, there are security cameras all over this house. If the media sees you throwing out a boy who just saved your wife and child—" His words trail off, but the implication lingers heavily in the air. Mr. Langston's jaw tightens. His reputation is at stake. His sharp blue eyes flick toward the butler, his mind clearly calculating the consequences of his next move. Around the room, guests exchange uncertain glances, whispers filling the empty space. The atmosphere is thick with expectation, all eyes waiting for the powerful businessman's reaction. The woman, still cradling her belly, narrows her eyes at her husband. "You care more about your image than your family's safety." Her voice is no longer shaken but firm, her anger bubbling to the surface. She holds their toddler closer, her protective instincts clear. She had just experienced terror, her life, their child's life, all hanging in the balance. And yet, the first thing her husband had done was attempt to cast out the boy who saved them. Mr. Langston exhales, pinching the bridge of his nose. His polished composure cracks just slightly, but enough for those watching to notice. He had built his empire on control, on authority. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not like this. But the weight of the room, the judgment in his wife's gaze, and the butler's warning all pressed down on him. For the first time, Mr. Langston falters. His lips press into a thin line, his mind undoubtedly racing through every scenario. If he stands his ground, dismissing the boy as nothing more than a street rat, the cameras will see. The world will see. And if there's one thing a man like him cannot afford, it is bad publicity. After a long pause, he sighs. His fingers tighten at his sides before he finally relents. Fine. The boy stays, for now. His voice is clipped, devoid of warmth, but the words carry weight nonetheless. It isn't kindness, it's necessity. Malik can't believe his ears. Was this real? He expected to be pushed out the door, discarded like trash as he had been so many times before. He shifts on his feet, unsure if this is truly a victory or just another setup for disappointment. Around him, the tension in the room doesn't ease. Guests murmur in hushed tones. The butler exhales softly, and the woman gives one last piercing look at her husband before turning to Malik. There is gratitude in her eyes, but also something else, a quiet understanding. She knows this isn't over. Malik swallows hard, his fists slowly unclenching. He has been thrown out of places before, but never asked to stay. Not like this. The uncertainty hangs in his chest, a question he isn't sure how to answer. Should Malik trust this sudden change? What would you do? Let's talk. Mr. Langston exhales sharply, then gestures toward his assistant with a flick of his wrist. Give him clothes, a meal, and— The room is silent as he reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out a sleek, leather-bound checkbook. He flips it open, scrawling his signature with an expensive pen. Give him $10,000. The number sits boldly on the check, the ink still fresh. The moment is surreal. Malik's breath catches in his throat. $10,000. A fortune. More money than he has ever seen in his life. His mind races. This could be his escape. The key to getting off the streets, to finding food without scavenging, to sleeping somewhere warm instead of shivering under city bridges. This could change everything. But something in Mr. Langston's smirk feels off. The man barely glances at him as he extends the check. There is no warmth, no sincerity, only the same cold dismissal Malik had seen in his eyes from the start. There, I did my part. Now, get out. The words hit like a slap. The tension in the room doesn't fade. Mr. Langston's wife watches from the staircase, her face unreadable. The butler, still standing near the doorway, shifts uneasily. The guests murmur amongst themselves, some exchanging nervous glances, unsure whether to celebrate the gesture or question it. Malik stares at the check, his hands clenching at his sides. Was this really a reward, or just a way to make him leave quietly? A bribe disguised as generosity, a convenient way to erase his presence without causing a scandal. His stomach twists, uncertainty tightening around him like a noose. He looks up at Mr. Langston, searching his face for something, anything, that would tell him this was genuine. But all he sees is a man who wants him gone, who wants to silence the moment and move on as if none of this ever happened. Malik's fingers twitch at his sides. He has never had this kind of choice before. The money could give him freedom, but at what cost? Malik stares at the check. Was this really a reward, or just a way to make him leave quietly? What would you do in Malik's shoes? Take the money or stay. Let's discuss. Malik takes a deep breath and makes a decision. His fingers brush against the check one last time before he slowly lifts it and extends his hand, not to take, but to return it. The room, once filled with murmurs and tension, goes completely silent. Every pair of eyes locks onto him, waiting, watching. I don't want money, Malik says, his voice steady. I want a chance. The butler's brow lifts slightly, and even Mr. Langston's wife shifts forward, surprise flickering in her expression. The guests exchange uncertain glances, whispering among themselves. They had expected Malik to snatch the money and run, to take the easy way out. Instead, he stands firm, refusing what most would consider a golden opportunity. Mr. Langston laughs coldly, shaking his head as if amused by a foolish child. And what do you think you deserve? His voice drips with condescension, his icy blue eyes narrowing as he studies the boy before him. Malik squares his shoulders, standing taller despite the weight of exhaustion and struggle that clings to him. A job. A way to prove I'm worth more than just a handout. The air in the room shifts. The guests, who had once dismissed Malik as just another poor kid, now regard him with something different. Curiosity, maybe even respect. The butler, standing near the entrance, presses his lips together as if holding back a smirk. Mr. Langston's wife watches her husband closely, waiting for his reaction. Mr. Langston leans back slightly, rubbing his chin as he considers the bold request. His gaze lingers on Malik, searching for weakness, for doubt, for anything that might prove this boy isn't worth his time. But Malik doesn't flinch. He has been looked down on his entire life. He has nothing left to fear. After a long silence, Mr. Langston exhales sharply. Fine. You want to prove yourself? Then prove it. His voice is clipped, but there is something behind it. Acknowledgement, perhaps the slightest glimmer of respect. Months later, Malik isn't just a boy on the streets anymore. He has a home, an education, and a future. The work is hard, the expectations higher than anything he's ever known, but he pushes forward, determined not to waste the opportunity he fought for. One evening, as he walks past the same mansion, he pauses at the grand gates, his fingers grazing the cool metal. He looks up at the towering estate, remembering the night everything changed. A quiet smile tugs at his lips. I thought I was just saving them, but in the end, I saved myself too. A decision that changed everything. What's the biggest lesson from Malik's story? Let's talk in the comments.